Yes. Thank you. Number one, I want to thank all the candidates for being here tonight. And number two, an observation. I graduated from high school, I'm an old man, in 1967. There was no Department of Education throughout my entire public school experience. And I'm walking and talking. So, I don't know what the protocol is. Maybe I can ask a question and everybody can deal with it. Is that correct?
I would prefer that you ask one because I
Oh,
saw
okay,
about
fine.
10 hands
Okay,
up, so I know
okay.
that-
So I'm asking a question to a particular candidate.
Or maybe someone would like to just jump in
Okay.
there
Well,
and answer that.
this is a policy. This position is a policy position. So I will direct it to Meka and anybody else who cares to answer it. Maybe people can start talking in depth a little bit about experience and background regarding this position and its policy component. So we can start with Meka, I guess.
On the tables, I have my card. If you don't have one, please do make sure you pick one up. I lay out what qualifies me to be the next state superintendent of education. One, I'm proud to be a product of the public schools in our state. Two, I specifically trained ultimately kindergarten to this position. Trained as a teacher when I received my license to teach at Duke University. I've also trained as a policy person, but also to run agencies or nonprofits when I received my public policy, my master's in public policy at the Duke University Terry Sanford Institute of Public Policy. I started out in the classroom where I worked alongside parents and students, implementing the very policies that we are now talking about as a school teacher, working with middle school students. I've also continued to work in the community, but I've also worked in the private sector where I worked with business and industry leaders. So some of those relationships you're talking about in terms of working with people who are not just those within education, but outside of education, I've cultivated those relationships and have built on them over years, working with business and industry leaders all over the state. That's why more and more of them are coming forward to support my candidacy. I've served on an education oversight committee, which is a policy setting body. I've also worked with Dr. Zates as a deputy state superintendent of education, where I ran about half of the Department of Education. And so in terms of being prepared, I believe my bio speaks for itself in terms of being prepared, but also having a passion and a vision for what our children need, for what's coming forward in our state and our country.
Can I address that as well, please?
Yes.
Yes. If you're happy with the status quo and the way policy has been handling, Meka's your candidate. I am not a politician. I have been involved with policy for 23 years in the practice of attorney. With that in mind, I know how to research law, I understand law, I know how to argue it before legislative bodies. If I can argue a case and represent clients in the state Supreme Court, then certainly I can present a case for our children to the State Board of Education or to the legislature. Policy is part of what I do, and it's a skill, and it's a skill that I have as an attorney. I ask that you consider that, and consider that not only do I understand policy and how to communicate that to others, I have a personal stake in this with my own 2 children currently in the system. And with my background in education, I understand what those children need.
All right, I'd like to take a stab at this too.
Competitive here.
I have a unique perspective, I believe, because I have never been a part of the system. And I think if we continue kicking the can down the road with the same failed policies, we're going to get the same results. And I have to submit to you also that if you have a candidate that's already had an opportunity in the superintendent's office and has not done the things that they claimed they were going to do originally against Common Core, and yet you have an activist on the outside that led a movement that stopped Common Core, how much better can it be to have that person leading the superintendent's office, taking that kind of leadership and vision and moving forward on the things that she says she's going to do. We had a superintendent, Mick said he was against Common Core. He campaigned against it, and he did nothing to stop it. In fact, what he did was he committed us further through the Smart and Balanced test and through the No Child Left Behind waiver. As your superintendent of education, I will make sure we don't end up with Common Core under a different name. And I will do the things that I said I was going to do.
I know, but Elizabeth had said she wanted to speak. Are you speaking on this?
I no. All right.
We need to know.
No. You know, what I find interesting is when we talk about children that obvious that if you're not an educator, then you don't know how children learn. But I'm going to tell you, I had 4 children. I feel like a early childhood specialist, a adolescent specialist, an early adult specialist. It's all about human growth and development, and it's really not that complicated. We all want the same thing for our children, and education really is about quality of life and what you want to be when you grow up. And that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to help you read, write, and do math, which is getting back to the basics. I've always been about revising the standards of learning so that they were age, grade, and developmentally appropriate. We have been given a golden opportunity to finally do that by the General Assembly, directing the State Board of Education, the Education Oversight Committee, and I'm looking forward to working with both of those organizations to ensure that we have quality standards.
This is a different view, Gene, but students are our product. And that's what we have to concentrate on. And what we can do for the students. Can we develop programs? Can we get national money? I'm a grant writer. I can bring in money. I've worked with the legislature. I was given $100,000 for 10 years to run the programs at the South Carolina Academy of Science. And to tell you a story about Morning Gazette, one of the recessions we had on 205 or 206, they were going to cut everything I had. The Gazette came, he said, you want me to come to your office or you want me to go, he's a state senator, you want to go to come to my office? I said, I'll come to your office. He came in, I sat down and told him the programs I was running. I was running right here at the Elementary School Academy of Science. And before I left, he said, I had you out of the program, you're in the program, and we stayed there another 5 years. I can work with the students and the teachers. We've got to put them first.
Dr. Burgess.
That was an excellent question. As superintendent of schools, I've written policy and implemented policy. As the principal of school, I had to use policy to correct schools. As superintendent, we had a school on the 100 worst schools list in South Carolina. After implementing policy and working with the Pope, that school is now a National Blue Ribbon School and also Palmetto's finest school. It's Townville Elementary School in Anderson, South Carolina. And Deer Hill Middle School is Spartanburg 5. But I'm going to invoke the Ronald Reagan principle not to speak ill of my fellow Republicans. All these are great vote, but I have the experience to do what needs to be done. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I didn't realize everybody would be so enthusiastic, Gene, but thank you for that question. Will?
I've heard we're talking about students and we're talking about teachers, but the most basic component of any student learning is the parent. Now, as a teacher for 16 years in high school, I always wound up preaching to the choir. Okay, and I taught at Title I low-end school. But those people who were interested in their children's education always managed to make the conferences and whatever they needed to do to be involved in their education. So my question to you, Dr. Burgess, how do you get parents to quit abdicating their responsibility at home?
I think that when we started these preschool programs, we said to parents, and I remember this, State said to parents, you poor parents can't educate these kids, give these kids to us. So that sent a message to parents that they were no longer responsible for their children. What you need to do is this next superintendent has to be someone who will stand up and not be politically correct. And I get accused oftentimes of playing the race card with Republicans. Now, isn't that silly? How do you play the race card with Republicans when there's only about 3% black folks who are Republican? But you got to call the donkey in the room. And you've got to say, you folks need to start taking care of your children. We demand to come to school. Go into those neighborhoods, carry the press with you, and make sure that we are saying to the public that you need to take responsibility for your child. Parents will do that if we say it, but what we've done, we've put police in schools, and you have to have all this ID to get in school, and now we're actually saying to a certain segment of the population, we really don't want you in school unless you're baking muffins and bringing donuts.
Boeing had to hire a lot of technical jobs from out of state because our students and workforce didn't have the skills, and yet our school guidance counselors are telling everybody to go to four-year college. So what will you do to train the guidance counselors on the career demands that are out there and how to get things like certificate programs that will get them high-paid jobs? Let's start with Elizabeth.
Guidance counselors, that's something that's very important. State regulation says you can have one guidance counselor to every 300 students. I'm sorry, but that's not enough. We need less police and more guidance counselors so that we can take corrective actions instead of punitive actions, which is unfortunately what's happening. I don't think most of you realize that the police in our schools are not necessarily, we're talking about outside intrusion, and they're inside our schools policing our students. And it's unfortunate because if you go and look at the South Carolina Joint Legislative Study for Children's Health and Safety, 20,000 students are incarcerated at DJJ, and out of 18,000 of those students are there for non-violent, disrupting the learning environment coming out of schools because of what the environment we have created inside our schools. And so we need to educate our young people on what the opportunities are out there. And I know the bottom line for my children is, what am I going to make at the end of this education? I think that's very important.
The superintendent's office is not providing training on career counseling. That's not happening. So that needs to happen.
Okay, Ann. Yes, my question is for Sheri. And I would like to pose basically the same question that Bill did to Sheri. How do you feel, and what would you do to encourage parents' responsibilities within the schools? I'm a mental health counselor. I see a problem where parents today basically feel like the system needs to take care of the child. What would you do?
Well, I get this question a lot. And I'm a little defensive as a parent, okay, because my experience with my public school children was very similar to what Gary was describing. I wanted to be involved with my children's education, but the level of involvement that they wanted from me was raise money and make sure my kids' homework was done on time. Beyond that, it stopped at the door. I was not welcome in my child's classroom. They didn't want to hear input on curriculum. I had to sign waivers for all 3 of my children on the classes I wanted them to attend. I had to take personal responsibility, signing a waiver saying that I took responsibility for the outcomes because I wanted to select the courses that they took in high school. And they all did well. So if we would treat parents better, they might be more involved. So we can do a better job with that. So I'm just defending parents because that has been my experience, and I'm sure I'm not the only parent that has been treated that way. So there's generations of that's occurred. Beyond that, instituting a voucher system is going to make parents consumers. And then a private school setting, if they want to keep the parents' money in their school, they're going to treat parents better, and parents are going to be more involved. So that's, those are 2 answers that I hope address your question.
Thank you, Sheri. Kathy.
Let Linda Enzer go first because she's got her hand up first.
All right, Linda.
Thank you. As some of you know, this is probably a pretty educated audience. So a number of us in this audience have been to the state school board and seen what goes on there. I've been going since 2010, and I saw that state school board take a perfectly good superintendent of school, and it was like a really bad marriage. If he said yes, they said no. If he said no, they said yes. And a lot of the questions we're asking you, I don't think the superintendent can do a darn thing about it. I think the local school boards have to. So my question for you, and maybe I'll start with Meka because I know she's been there. How are you going to break through that? Because they really, like I said, they took an excellent superintendent, I thought, and just completely hamstrung it.
I appreciate you pointing out a historically accurate representation of what's taking place while Dr. Zace has been state superintendent. Kind of how I would handle things. You do have to do all you can based on the Constitution of this state and based on the statutes that are on the books to work with the school board, the state board of education as much as you can. I also believe that there will be instances where you will need to work with the General Assembly to change the statutes that are driving the regulations that the board promulgates. I will tell you that I'm pretty good at forming collaborative relationships so that the informal process of building a rapport that I think will cultivate the sort of changes on the board that will be necessary. I've already laid the groundwork for that, though it's been quite contentious because they have the sort of change you were describing earlier. We actually sought to advance, but they resisted in terms of offering board training so that schools will understand the cultural changes that need to take place to advance the sorts of causes and conditions that you're describing. So it's going to have to be a multi-pronged approach where you're cultivating the relationships, but also doing what you can to work through making the formal changes that are necessary to strengthen your position.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yes, okay. When I decided to run for this position, I spoke to a local principal in my school district. And I called on the phone one day and I said, if I were state superintendent, what would you want to say to me? She said, wow. She said, the first thing I want to say to you is thank you for reaching out to me. Because you know what? That has never happened before. That was eye-opening. You do have to be proactive. You have to reach out. You have to learn. You have to communicate. As state superintendent, you want a leader. You want a person who not only understands the system, understands children, but is an advocate. Also at the State Department, the state superintendent is like running a business. That person has to be able to make business decisions regarding funding, regarding budgeting, based on your philosophy. I'm the only candidate that has run successfully a business for 23 years and also has children in school and has the legal knowledge to do a good job. Thank you.
I'd like to address that one also on this. Linda, with all due respect, I think you know that I disagree with you on this question regarding Dr. Zace and what he could have done, especially relating to Common Core. Because we worked so hard and we tried to get his help in the grassroots effort. We tried to get a meeting with him and he wouldn't even meet with us. What he could have done is he could have helped us to have public forums across the state where both sides were presented. We got very close to having a meeting with him, but when he decided he was not seeking re-election, he refused to meet with us. In addition to that, he didn't need to commit our state to the Smarter Balance Testing Consortium as a governing body. When we went to the state Senate and the Senate was discussing S300, Senator Wes Hayes was livid. He was very upset because Dr. Zace wasn't there, and he asked his staff, what is his position on Common Core? And they couldn't even say. So there was far more that he could have done, and I saw this firsthand in our struggles. So I just disagree as far as your perspective on what the superintendent can do. And as the next superintendent, I will do far more than what I saw in this administration.
Thank you, Sheri. Dr. Jordan, do you want to address that?
Go students.
Well, there's something that I think we all need to be focused on, and it is the state board. One of the things, unfortunately, the General Assembly, of course, appoints the state board, and we tend to appoint birds of a feather. They're all like-minded individuals, not very innovative and creative, and they're all educrats for the most part, or retired ones for that matter. Nothing against Kathy. But you need different ideas. You need people coming from different segments of the community. I run a business, 3 businesses with my husband for the last 26 years, so I understand the business aspect of it. I understand customer service and also constituent service. I also think that you need to understand that the education is the second largest funding part of the budget from the state budget. We have $3 billion, almost $4 billion, $3,844 million actually to be exact. And that money is then rediverted, gone through the State Department of Education and is rediverted to all our districts. But I do think you have to have ideas. You've got to be able to get consensus and work with people. Oh, and just one more thing. There are 5 seats that are up for appointment on the State Board of Education, and that's something that we can do something about.
Kathy, I believe it's.
Because this is 912, I'm assuming that most of the audience in here are conservatives. And because you're Republicans, I'm assuming sort of the same thing. And as conservatives, most of us want to see less federal government involved in our school system. And I'm hearing a lot of talk about grants, and most of us in this room also understand when we take grant money, there are always strings attached. And if we reject taking the grant money, then the liberals come after us, screaming that we're not taking money that we need to educate our children. So how do we accomplish what we want to accomplish without taking the grant money and overcoming all of the opposition that comes from the liberals?
I want to answer that because I brought up grants. Let me tell you what grant I was involved with. I was co-PI with Clemson, South Carolina State, and the University of South Carolina. And we did projects for underprivileged kids right here in your community when Kano High School was here. I had no ties. They didn't tell me how to run my program. They gave me the money to run the program. Gave it to Clemson and gave it to South Carolina State. And we developed programs for kids. We had morning session for 4 hours with 4 different key lecturers, some of the best in the state. We had a role model in 5 hours and we were gone. It was a beautiful program. And so not all grants are tied to, guidelines. Not at all. And we don't need grants to write our guidelines. I've told you that I've been involved with that. I was with the governor's school in Hartsfield. I actually helped develop their curriculum. I was working in the 80s. None of this with Barbara Nielsen was grant tied. So you can get tied with the grant. But you also can write a grant that really serves the student.
I would just like to address the issue between Common Core and the waiver from the No Child Left Behind and the Title I money, because I think there's been a lot of confusion there, that if we didn't accept a Common Core, that we were going to lose $212 million in Title I funding, when in fact that's farthest from the truth. In all reality, you had 2 choices. You could either, your institutions of higher education approved your standards, which our institutions already did, so there was no reason to go down this road for the Common Core. So the grant money was never, Title I money was never a part of not getting it under the waiver for the No Child Left Behind. But I do think it's important that everybody understand that when you're getting federal grants, it's still taxpayer money.
I do want to respond to that. Go ahead. One, I think we need to take a long view. The federal government is coercing those dollars out of our pockets. So what we need to do is push back systematically by making sure our General Assembly, our governor's office, and our congressional delegation knows the instances where we're being driven to do things in South Carolina in education because of federal mandates. We do have to be cautious, though, when we're looking at rejecting those funds. We also need to make sure that decision by decision, we understand what the implications are for turning those funds back. But there are going to be some clear instances where we need to turn the funds back because of the strings tied to them. I do think long term, though, we want to push back on the extent to which Washington, D.C. is micromanaging what's happening in our schools. I'm proud to have stood firm and offer recommendations to reject grants like the CDC grant, Centers for Disease Control, that for decades was imposing in our schools values that run counter to the sex education law that's been in place in our state. You say no, you turn back those funds, and then you stop having to take the actions. So they're discretionary funds, and they're also mandates. And we've got to take it case by case, decision by decision. But the long-term desired end state is to get Washington, D.C. out of micromanaging what's happening in our classrooms.
Or it would be and glad to get this, because I know before you, so maybe they could respond to it.
Well, I think it's important that one, Dr. Zays, he's a general, United States Army. He's perfectly capable of defending himself. But I will tell you, in the campaign, he did speak out against Common Core, and that there were plenty of people who spoke out against the position he was taking. When he came into office, the standards were already in place in terms of the State Board of Education having adopted them. So the question becomes, does the State Superintendent of Education, a constitutionally elected officer who takes an oath of office to uphold the Constitution of our state and the laws of our state, does he stand for, does he implement those laws which tell the State Board of Education it has authority over standards, or does he defy those laws? And anyone who'll tell you that they would have not implemented the Common Core state standards, or at least not supported the districts as they were implementing the Common Core state standards, well, we've heard that before, where people say with a pen and with a phone, they'll decide which laws they want to implement. I mean, these conservatives are opposed to having a federal law. Is that honestly what we want happening here in South Carolina? We also need to be mindful of the fact that those standards started getting implemented in summer 2010 before Dr. Zays came to office. So the truth needs to be told in terms of what historically is accurate.
I'd like to address that too, because at a Greenville forum where Dr. Zays was making comments, Sharmika was there and I was there also, and this is recorded in a Greenville newspaper, he made comments, public comments, and it's been more than once, that there are portions of Common Core that he supports. He likes the informational text. He believes that all high school students shouldn't be expected to read classical literature. So there are elements of Common Core that he likes and would like to keep. So he's not fully against Common Core, like most of us in this room. So, to say that he's against Common Core is just not wholly true, and he has admitted that publicly.
Cheryl and then Joe.
Okay. I'd like to direct this question to Dr. Burgess first, because you place a lot of emphasis and discussion on the local level, what's really happening in the schools with the children. And we have all talked about how that is really where the action is and should be. I think everybody seems to be in agreement on that. And what I'm wondering is, from my own experience, I'm a counselor educator by training, and I'm always startled at programs and all these things that educators come up with every few years when education looks terrible and we need to fix. There's another program, and clearly that has not worked. In my experience working with school choice for some years, we did have hearings around the state, and we got public input, but that came from the House of Representatives, from the committee chairman that I worked with, and we got the speaker's sanction to do that. It was a joint committee, Senate and House and all that, and we got a lot of grassroots information out and support. What I'm wondering is, if we want things to be driven at the local level, then we have to have a really informed local level. How can the Superintendent of Education sort of change their role, their thinking, to empower the parents and the people at the local level from that position? Yes.
That's an excellent question. I think two things. One, that the state superintendent has to use his voice to amplify the voices of the public, educators. And in doing that, he has to make sure that parents understand, all parents understand, that they have a choice in decisions that are made at the local level. The second thing you have to do, and we're meeting this group next Wednesday, I think, is called the South Carolina School Board Association. I'm on a school board, and I know that Elizabeth remembers this when we first got on the school board. We went to the training And the training was this, is that the school board needs to follow the superintendent, not the superintendent follow the school board. And I'm like, that's interesting. Why shouldn't the superintendent follow the school board instead of the elected officials? So the state superintendent has to say to superintendents and to the state school board association, we need to allow parents and teachers and educators to make decisions. Going back to D.R. Hill, I was principal. The counselors, the teachers, the parents made decisions at the school. That school is one of the lowest performing schools in the state. And because of their input and their involvement, that school turned around. We did not fire one teacher. We did not threaten anybody because they knew they had a voice at the table. They were able to turn that school around. And you would love to work at that school. You would love it. I still talk about it. It was a great place. But you have to, but the superintendent has to.
This is not working. I promise to be brief. I love the way you phrase that question because that's actually something that I would like to do as superintendent of education. I've been talking a little bit about that. And in fact, that's what I was hoping to encourage Dr. Zace to do, to do these public forums, to educate people. And I would even like to educate teachers about school choice so they're not so afraid of it. Because it was the teachers, back during the time when you and I were both fighting for school choice, it was the teachers who were misinformed, by the School Boards Association, School Administrators Association. They had these high-paid lobbyists that had all these talking points that they were feeding through our taxpayer dollars to these teachers that they believed. And I would like, as superintendent of education, to hold forums to educate teachers and parents, to educate them on these issues so they understand the truth. We did it with Common Core, it worked, and we can do it through the superintendent's office on these other issues.
Thank you. Barbara.
This is for me. I have heard some people say that you were instrumental in the No Child Left Behind writing some of the things, and then that you're not, that when it came for Common Core, you said that you're not for Common Core, but some of your previous things led to us having Common Core. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. There's, again, the record's clear. 2010, summer, I voted against the Common Core state standards. The waiver that some referred to, the opportunity to pursue for the waiver did not even emerge until the fall of 2011. So in terms of the reason why the South Carolina Department of Education chose to pursue the waiver, it's in part because you had two difficulties. You had the onerous burden of the No Child Left Behind that goes back to 2010 and the tragic impact it's having on our schools. At the same time, you had a set of standards that I don't agree with, but that the State Board of Education had adopted in the summer of 2010. Given the opportunity in the fall of 2011, knowing that the State Board of Education, the votes had not changed, they were not going to repeal Common Core, Dr. Zace made the decision to leverage the waiver to get out of some of the provisions of No Child Left Behind by just acknowledging the fact that our state had already adopted Common Core state standards. So no, I did not advance the adoption of the Common Core state standards. In terms of the implementation of the Common Core state standards, school districts implement standards. The State Department of Education helps them comply with the law. And so the historical record is very clear. Unless I was a project manager and going after that waiver that helps support our schools in getting out of some of the onerous provisions of the No Child Left Behind law, which is still the law of the land, by the way. That law's not going anywhere.
Okay, I'm convinced that some of these people do not have peripheral vision. I'm going to have to get right.
We need to recognize, one, y'all are getting to ask us questions and get our views. And second, we are learning a heck of a lot. I've been doing this about a month. I have blossomed what I've learned from people that have expressed an interest in the candidacies. So we don't want this position appointed. Otherwise, we don't have this. I don't learn, and you don't get to ask me questions. Also, I want to take the time to recognize my colleague here, Franklin Ashley, a very gifted professor professor, once at USC, now at the College of Charleston. But I've always admired him. I got to work in writing shops, and I learned a lot like to write children's textbooks. Franklin, good to see you again.
You also learned the class.
Can I just follow up on the previous question, just briefly?
Yes, Sheri, we're all learning.
I really believe with the No Child Left Behind waiver and that law, yes, it's not going away perhaps anytime soon, but you know, there's been a lot of threats around the country for states that have backed out of the standards from Arnie Duncan, and I think it's time that states stand up to the federal government and say, keep your money, okay? As your next superintendent of education, I won't be filling out a waiver. I will say, keep your money. I'm not going to commit our state to faulty standards that will destroy public education and destroy children. I will say, keep your money and call their bluff. Because it's never happened in America's history. It only happened one other time in California, and the only portion of that money that they kept was the administrative portion. So instead of the $214 million that Elizabeth was talking about that we stand to lose, only 1% of that is actually what we would lose, which is $214,000. Well, I don't think our state is going to be strapped to lose that little bit of money. And I think it's time that we stand up to the feds and tell them to keep their darn money.
I really think the federal budget should stay the hell out of our schools. I also think, as far as 4-year-olds being made to go to school, I think it's ridiculous. I mean, parents should. I didn't want my 4-year-old going to school. I wanted them home. I just think it's all okay.
Good for you.
So I'm a product of Charleston County Schools. I went to Sullivan's Island and Lane and Moultrie, London High School, went on to Clemson, and then after Clemson I went to Louisiana and taught for a few years. The school that I taught in was ranked 699 out of 699 elementary schools. So it was worse than Louisiana. And Louisiana is typically ranked behind South Carolina. So it was a pretty bad situation. But there's another silver lining in this story. That is, Louisiana has done a lot of really aggressive stuff with ed reform, led by Bob Chandler. Okay, so they have pushed through school choice. They have taken a lot of charter schools that have performed really well across the nation, like KIPP, Yes Prep, and Best Master charter schools, and they've expanded those charter schools within the state. They've gotten away with last in, first out. And so I guess my question is, we've talked a lot about no Common Core, but how can we better empower the state of South Carolina to take perennially underperforming schools? Because that doesn't happen here in Charleston County. Or it does, but on a very small scale. But across the state, like Marlborough County, for example, there are schools that have been failing for 30 or 40 years down what they call a corridor of shame. So what are some things we can do as a state that would help turn some of those schools around?
Thank you, Jared. All right, we'll start with Meka, and then I see Sheri have her hands up.
You hear me often talking about protecting powers and delivering to our state by eliminating federal overreach, because I do believe that education decisions are best made closest to the child. So I'm a proponent of local control. However, we do have to acknowledge that we seem to have some schools, some districts that are plagued by dysfunctional leaders. I think part of what we really need to do is look at 5 points in time when we say a school or district has failed perennially. We'll take that district over or take over that school, but only if we have a very clear exit strategy for improvements in student performance to let us know we, as quickly as we can, give that school back. That's one of the things that we've seen Governor Bobby in general advance in Louisiana. I think that's important. But an essential component of improving schools is going to be advancing an array of options for our children so that we can empower parents by allowing money to follow the child, the learning environment their parents choose. So advanced, strong local control, high-quality opportunities, but that has to be matched with empowered parents with real educational freedom, real school choice.
Sheri.
I I'm so glad you asked that question. I believe Governor Jindal has also championed vouchers, if I'm not mistaken. And that's the biggest part of my platform. In South Carolina, we've talked about school choice. We've talked about money following child. But people in South Carolina have been afraid to say the V word. In fact, I was the first candidate in this race to say the V word, and I'm so proud of the other candidates are starting to say it. That's what we need in South Carolina. That's what the I-95 corridor needs more than anything. Because the students on the I-95 corridor in those schools, by and large, are from single-parent homes. Those kids need a good moral foundation, and government schools cannot provide that to those students. We know that they can't do that because they are government schools. So if we believe in the free market, what the free market will do once we institute a voucher system is that churches will start good Christian schools in those areas. And they will provide the moral foundation that those students need, and then we will see academic achievement in those areas. And that's what I believe will turn those areas around.
I'm glad I have a fellow that worked in an inner city school. I worked in an inner city school that's Spartanburg, 95% African American, 95% free and reduced lunch. Now I'm going to tell you this, and talking to the board there and others, there was not a real concern about those kids doing well. In fact, I was told my job is not to improve the school, but to lid on the school. You need to understand this. You need to understand this. This is why folks get angry with me. And I don't mind because one of the 12, I think, values of the 912 project is courage. Somebody has to be able to stand up and say, we're tired of making billions of dollars off the backs of poor kids, kids of color, and teachers. We want these kids to be educated. I tell you what, this is why I have this press conference on Saturday. You need to understand that there are folks in this state that really don't want those people to improve, because if they improve, it cuts the money supply.
In my opinion, we need teachers like you that care about kids, who are willing to go into those schools. And so if we're going to improve a rural school that's in a poor district that's down and out, we're going to have incentives for teachers to go into that school. That may mean a bonus, that may mean travel, that may mean some kind of subsistence for homes, but we got to get the teachers like you in the system. That's going to help them work.
They need higher salary.
Money's not the answer.
Say that again.
What we've figured out is that a lot of the new students, new graduates that we are hiring in our district are not prepared to teach in secondary education. This is an issue that we have in higher education, and it really comes down to the standards as well. Reading is very fundamental, and it's very important to have an experienced teacher, especially in first and second grade, but for sure kindergarten through third grade, to ensure that those teachers know how to teach the fundamental basics of reading. And if we had that, and that experience, and those teachers understanding that, then we wouldn't be having these problems. We did put literacy specialists in all our elementary, and of course, I think the governor's initiative to do it for the rest of the state and the General Assembly as agreed. But isn't it sad that we have teachers, we have to hire literacy specialists because they don't know how to teach it?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Amy?
It's interesting that in Louisiana, they spend much less per child than we do in South Carolina. But yet, they have turned things around, and not because of the dollars. I strongly disagree with what she says about our teachers. When our teachers are graduating from our colleges in education with a BA or a master's degree or even more, they are prepared for our classrooms. Now, what's happening is they're getting in the classrooms and they're being stifled first. I can tell you that when I was working on my master's degree, we took many classes on how you teach children to read and how they learn to read. That's not for stifling our children. It's the federal government and our school districts to come in and tell them that this is how you're going to teach, when and how, and how you're going to evaluate it. Our teachers are not being allowed to teach. And then our good teachers are not being kept in the schools because they are not rewarded for being good teachers. We are losing our good teachers.
Thank you all. Bill just said we're getting restless in the back of the room. But I promise, I mean, you don't have to speak 2 minutes, but you have to.
Well, I think this has been actually probably one of the better exchanges that we've had in the forums that we've attended. And I really appreciate it. We're also getting very tired, so you're able to see our real personality. We're starting to pander to each other. I'm better, no, I'm better. No. But this is something that I know. I think most of you know that I have run. This is my 3rd time running. It's not like I just decided yesterday, but it's something that's been very passionate to me, our children and education of our children and what we need to do about it. And I think it's very simple. I know that we need to have diploma options. I know we need to revise our standards of learning from an inch deep to a mile wide, and have age grade development as appropriate standards so that teachers can teach and students can learn the fundamental basics of reading, writing, and math. I mean, that's really ultimately what we want. Unfortunately, we've had a laundry list of standards, and I think any one of you in here that have taught know that we've had quantity and not quality, and we're not getting the foundation, the fundamental foundation of the basics of mastery in reading, writing, and math. And I think those are something that we really need to make sure that when we revise these standards, that we're not teaching kindergartners as 1st graders, that we teach kindergarten. I mean, because there is a human growth and development element in all of our children, and there is a huge growth between 2nd and 3rd grade, and all my children struggled at reading, and yes, we had books, and yes, I read them to my students, but it was just a human growth and development element that we need to allow. Yes, some students may read early, that's great, but the mass majority do not. It's something that they have to learn. It's the hardest thing we learn, and we learn it as children. It's a foreign language to them. So I ask for your support on June 10th, and thanks for having me.
I'm going to talk about teachers just for a second, and I'm going to close with my story. First of all, currently, the evaluation process for teachers is wrong. It's been perceived that we're going to start grading teachers A, B, C, and D. I don't think any lawyer wants to be a B+ lawyer. I don't think any professor wants to be a C+ professor. You don't grade professionals A, B, C, and D. So that's out. The other thing is we're not going to tie the evaluation to test scores for students. That is not fair to the teacher. We have some excellent, have you ever been in an elementary school classroom? That's some of the most creative people I've ever known, and I go into a lot of them. And the other is we're going to write guidelines for the teachers. We're going to help, the teacher's going to be part of the writing team. At USC, I was chair of the 1040. I worked 80 hours a week with Sloan Construction Company on road. I loved the job. And in 3 weeks, I had my tuition for $300. Why could I work my way through college and not be in debt? What has happened? And how are we going to resolve that? We have to stop tuition increases. Thank you.
This is a K through 12 position.
This superintendent of education election is extremely important. We have been successful in stopping the Common Core standards. But in January 2015, the next superintendent of education will be responsible for appointing the writing team and overseeing the writing of the new standards. I agree, this forum has been extremely informative for all of you because you asked tough questions. And I think what you've seen from the questions that you've asked tonight is that most of the candidates here tonight do not understand the problems with Common Core. So if you don't elect the right superintendent of education, what we're going to end up with is just like Indiana or California or Oklahoma, Common Core under a different name. You've got to select the right superintendent of education. Once I've rewritten the Common Core standards and given us standards that reflect South Carolina values and point us back toward a basic education for students, then I'm going to convene a task force that reviews every textbook adopted in South Carolina, and we're going to do the same thing we did with Common Core. We're going to take it to the street, we're going to expose all the falsehood and all the bias, and we're going to put an end to the indoctrination of young children through taxpayers funding. In addition to that, we're going to take the same impetus that we use to stop the Common Core standards, and we're going to bring the voucher system to South Carolina. We did it with Common Core. I'm going to need your help, but I'm going to lead the way through the superintendent's office, and I'm going to hold forums all over the state to educate teachers and taxpayers so that we can make it happen in South Carolina. I've proven to you that I'm that kind of leader and I can make things happen, but I need your support. I need to win this office. You need to get behind me. Go to SheriFew.com, donate to my campaign, volunteer. I'd love to have your support. Thank you and God bless.
If any of you saw my handout, you see in the bottom corner, I'm pictured with Senator Katrina Shealy. Senator Shealy is, of course, our only female senator. And I was her attorney and then got to be a close friend. She came to me a couple months ago and sat across from me at my desk. And when we were discussing this race, she turned to me and asked me to run for state superintendent. She said, you have everything that that job needs. You have the background in education. You've been a lawyer. You've fought for choices that we need in our own school district. She was right. I have been a leader. I have made changes. You do not need, in the office of education, a politician. You do not need career politicians. We have 4 or 5 candidates who have at least run for office once, some for multiple offices, and one who has served as a Democrat in the House of Representatives for several terms. We don't need a politician. We need a person who understands education, who understands business, who is smart enough to make common sense business decisions, and who has been successful. Not only that, you've heard almost every candidate tell you how important policy is and being able to understand and implement state and federal laws into our school. I'm the candidate most qualified, with the most qualities, not just one issue. We have many issues that we need to address, and we cannot have a superintendent that is focused just on one issue. I'm Amy Cofield, and I ask for your vote. Thank you.
My name is Meka Childs. I understand personally the power of education to open doors that will ultimately be closed were it not for high-quality education opportunities. I'm a product of our schools and proud of it. We need to make sure that just as surely as I was educated in our state and went off to Duke University with large loan scholarship, every single child in our state needs to be prepared for all the opportunities that they will face in South Carolina or wherever they choose to go. I want to make sure that every child who receives a high school diploma in South Carolina is prepared for work or college and for citizenship. I'll focus in 5 areas. 1, I'll bring real accountability to our classrooms. 2, I will make sure we individualize education with real educational freedom. 3, I will make sure that we protect the powers of the union to our state by eliminating federal overreach. 4, I will fight to attract the very best teachers for our students. And 5th, I'll make sure we improve opportunity and community involvement. You can go to my website, MekaChilds.com, and learn more about my positions on a whole host of issues. We have a tremendous opportunity coming our way as a state. I want to make sure that our children are prepared to benefit from the economic upswing that's coming to South Carolina. I have the background, I have the passion, and I have the experience to make sure we get the job done. I ask for your support in 3 ways. Vote for me on June 10th. 2, tell everyone what I'm trying to accomplish as the next state superintendent of education. And 3, I ask you to consider making an investment into my campaign. My name is Meka Childs. Please go to MekaChilds.com. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
I am Gary Burgess, and I seek your support for the nomination on June 10th. But first, I want to thank my colleagues who've been tonight. It's been very spirited debate, and Kathy and Sarah for leading us through this debate. But I'm uniquely qualified for this position. 1, I've had to fight all of my life to experience the American dream. I've had to fight to also protect my name and my reputation. But with that said, we are not going to improve the school system in South Carolina until we talk about the donkey in the room. You look at the stats, we're spending billions of dollars on children of poverty because we told those children they cannot learn. How many of you grew up poor? Right, and we're here, we're successful. And we need to change that. We need to stop blaming our teachers for what is happening in the classroom because they're not at fault. The system is at fault. We need to stop blaming parents. We need to get parents engaged and involved in what's going on in our state. We can throw all the money we want to at this problem, and we're not going to improve until we decide as a state to say it like it is. And I get accused of saying it like it is. I'm not politically correct. You know what I know. Throughout the state, children of color, particularly black males, dragging their butt on every measure. We need to address that. Children of poverty are not doing well. We need to address that. We need to make sure that our teachers understand what we let them teach. Finally, if you're a teacher here, if you give me the right number of teachers, I don't care where they graduated from, I don't care what their principal's evaluation said, give me those teachers, as I've done before, and take me to the worst school system in the state, and we'll turn it around under 2 conditions. 3 conditions, really. If the federal government stays out of our business, if the state government allows us to do our job, and the district office get the heck off our back. Gary Burgess, www.burgess4sc.org. I need your money. I'm not an establishment candidate, and I need your support. I need to spread the word, but I have that value called courage, and I will stand up.
You're exhausted, huh? Well, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. And I was hoping for about 200 in the room for you. You all drive all over the place. And I just, this is a good crowd. And I'm glad that I would have loved to have just filled the entire building for you. So you wouldn't have to work so hard. But I admire how long you did the Coastal Courier. Well, a Coastal Courier person was going to come tonight. And Channel 4, I believe, Sheri, was it Channel 4? Debbie was able to get her head on to know when I was falling apart, and Debbie said, Kathy, I called Channel 4 and told them I was sending on a press release. So at least, he was here for the beginning.
Should be on at 11.
So we need to get out.
The interview will be on at 11 o'clock tonight.
Well,
it's just me, sorry.
He did not want to interview candidates. I thought that was interesting. He said, I want to interview someone who is just here for the poor. So, I don't know what to say. But thank you all again for coming, and thank you all for